right, welcome back to another episode of Hangar Flying with Smokehouse Pilots, and I'm super excited to have Michael Leek on the episode this evening. It sounds like we have a good conversation based on what we just chatted about. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your journey in aviation and also how you got into SIMUVATION, which is your company. And so welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about being here and talk with you.
Absolutely. So it sounds like we're not too far apart, really, from a geographical location. You're just up in New Jersey.
Yeah, especially in an airplane. I'm a quick ride for you. Close enough to get that $100 hamburger for sure.
Yes, sir. So one of the things you mentioned, Sky Manor. So I took one of my buddies up there who flies an Evo, and I took him up there. I guess his mechanic is located on that field there at Sky Manor. And so I flew him up there probably I flew up there to pick him up from dropping his plane. And so anyways, that's where I learned of Sky Manor. What a cool airport.
That's amazing. So the guy that owns Evo is actually in Doylestown, which isn't too far from us. They're being built out in Czech now. But yeah, Bob's a really cool guy. He had owned Lancer at one point too. He sold that. But yeah, it's just wild that's an amazing airplane. So the mechanic on that field's Andrew Adventures Aviation. He does a lot of turbine stuff. He's done like some of the experimental epics before they were certified, the Evo, stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really cool draw to that.
That's super cool.
Shop.
Yeah, when I was taking off out of that airport, we had 4 people in my plane and took off, and as soon as I'm making the left turn, there's a huge blimp that's kind of floating across the sky there. It's super memorable. But anyways,
that's awesome.
Well, look, I'm excited to learn more about you and kind of your background and frankly, what got you into aviation?
Yeah, so it's funny because I've gotten dinged in interviews for the way that I got into aviation, which is really it's crazy. But so I had started a tech company like almost 20 years ago, and it was a search engine for business jets, and so it was an AI machine learning play for scheduling business aviation. So I got into it because I was at JP Morgan at the time, and I was young. I had really no obligations. There was nothing holding me back. I just looked at any domain. I was like, of all the exciting things that I can do for the rest of my life, where should I go, right? What should I do? And I landed in aviation, and the reason was because of the opportunity. And so to me, I looked at it from like an analyst perspective, and I was like, this is an aging population. Obviously, aviation's fun. So that was one thing that was a draw no matter how you slice it. But I just looked at it like there's a lot of opportunity for technology. There's a lot of opportunity to improve things and disrupt the industry. And then the aging population. So that, to me, I was like, you know what? It's aviation. Like, you can't really get anything more exciting and more opportunity for me at that point. I was, I don't know, maybe I was 23, 24 years old. And so that was my foray into aviation. It was from the tech standpoint.
Wow. That's interesting. Where are you from?
I grew up in New Jersey, Morris County, about an hour west of Midtown Manhattan. And yeah, now I'm back in New Jersey. I left for a while, left for almost 10 years, and now I'm back just south of where I was from, on Route 78. So there's 78 and 80 going to Manhattan, and I'm on the southern route now.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, that's awesome. That's definitely a different way to get into aviation, right? So then what was your next step from there? So kind of give us the story on that.
Yeah. So it was cool because, I got to really see the industry like going in the back of the house, right? You get to see how everything runs, how everything operates. And I found that there were really 2 people that run aviation. A lot of finance people, and then much fewer aviators. But for me, the people that made the most impact on me as a professional, as a young entrepreneur, were the aviators. And so I was like, if I'm going to be successful, if I'm going to make a difference in this space, I need to have this core competency. And I started flying full time. So I went to flight school and just knocked out all my ratings. So I actually went to ATP, and this was almost 15 years ago.
Nice.
ATP was a lot smaller then. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I did everything. I did my private instrument ride together. So that's another
No
weird
kidding.
thing that was an
That's
exciting
impressive.
day.
That's really impressive. That's super cool.
And then I went through, I got all my flight instructor ratings. But, for me, I never wanted to be the guy that went from zero to hero and then instructed. So after I got my ratings, I stepped back and I just started to say, like, okay, well, where's my opportunity in aviation? How do I fit in somewhere where I can be mentored by really experienced aviators and not being the young aviator that's imparting my experience. So I never really loved that concept. And
Hmm.
so I started flying banners, and then I started interning at CAE. And so they have a program called the supporting crew members. And now it's not a free internship anymore. Now you actually get paid to do it. But for me, it was a unpaid internship. And what they do is they bring you in, they teach you about flying a jet. They'll put you through an initial type course, and then you act as a first officer for pilots that come for training alone. And so that really gave me such phenomenal access to really experienced and talented aviators. And so for me, that was my transition after flight instructor school into aviation full time. So I was towing banners to build flight time, and then
Yeah.
I was flying as an FO in the sim as much as I could.
Wow. That is super cool. Tell me about flying banners. I mean, I feel it's amazing when you watch them come down and you pick it up. I mean, it's quite the skill.
Oh man, I loved it. It's funny because I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. So like I've raced super bikes. I've done now I'm playing polo. I just do like all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And so for me, flying tail wheels was like that next thing. Like I really loved flying tail wheels. And then when you mix it into like where you get to tow banners, like most of aviation is like a lot of excitement on like the excitement's bounded by maybe boredom, right? And so banner towing is probably the pinnacle of that, right? Because it's a lot of excitement. You're like, you take off from the airport, you throw the hook out the window or the open door, and then you come around to the field. It's like this little mini, we call it the banner field, but it's like a setup where they'll set up the banners, and you fly a really tight pattern, and then you come and you dive to the ground, and then everything's set up like 30-ish, 36 inches off the ground. So they set up like a goalpost with a
Mm,
with a rope in between them. And so you dive down and you swing the hook that's now on the rear of the fuselage. You swing the hook through the banner and you hook it, and then you steep climb up and then level off, and you feel the banner tug, like you feel the banner tug you back.
right.
Um, so that was like it was perfect. I tell everybody that it's the best job for an 18-year-old, like a young pilot, other than maybe being a lifeguard. Like spending the summers as a lifeguard is amazing, but
Right.
I think the only thing better is towing banners. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, it looks so cool. I had a buddy. We did a flyout. I don't know if you saw this or not. We did a flyout. Not this is probably now about 8, 9 months ago, and he said you got to come down to Fredericksburg area, and I'm like, okay, we'll do a flyout down there. And so I'm flying down, and he says, hey, call me on whatever frequency it was, right? And so I called him up, and he said, hey, I'm over here, and just come over this way, and meet me in the air. He's like, I want to take a picture, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I go over, I'm flying over, and I find him, and then I look behind him, and he's got this massive banner behind him, which I had no idea he was going to do. And it said, Smokehouse Pilots or something. And I was like, how freaking cool is that?
No way.
And so we got some pictures of that. It actually just popped up in my feed the other day, but I was like, that is so cool. And so that's what he does, is flies banners, and completely surprised me out of nowhere. I thought that was
That's
pretty neat.
amazing. That's so cool.
So you were doing banners, and then obviously move into being a first officer or FO, right? You said?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So what the program I started in was the Hawker program, and it was at CAE in Morristown. It's technically Whippany. And so CAE is the largest producer of simulators and training pilots in the world. So they've built sims for a very long time. And now they have grown to where they're not just building sims anymore and selling sims. Now they're delivering training. So CAE delivers training or builds training centers for multiple airlines. But
Yeah.
in the world that I got into, it was all business aviation. So like in Whippany, there's 15 sims. Each sim is its own aircraft type. And so when I came in as an intern, I got tapped to go into the Hawker 800 program. Um, so it was the Hawker 800 and also the 1000, which is a really unique airplane. There aren't many of them. There's only one place to train in the world. It's at CAE in Morristown. So that was where I started. It was in the Hawker. And, it's cool because it's an airplane that doesn't have auto throttles. It's obviously, a more advanced airplane, but it's a pilot's airplane also. They're the original off-field landing air jet, right? Like the
Oh,
Pilatus
really? I didn't realize
PC-24.
that. Yeah. Hmm.
Oh, yeah, they were originally made to be like military transport, and they could have webbed seats in the back, and they're just really phenomenal performing airplanes. So yeah, that's like the OG unimproved field airplane. It's really cool.
That is super cool. I've actually flown in a Hawker one time, and we took our company. This was years ago, down to the BMW racing track down there in South Carolina, and we surprised them with a trip in the Hawker out of Dulles Airport. And so it was the Hawker, I think 700. Was there 700?
There was, yep, it's a little older.
Yeah, a little older.
Yep.
So that's what we flew in. But so that's awesome. So continue that forward. So then, where did that take you?
Yeah, so I actually got so that was like the cool thing about this program. It's they're selective, right? But
Hmm.
if you think about it, every time you're conducting your duties as an FO, you're almost in an interview because it's a pilot that's there for multiple reasons by themselves. Maybe there's only two pilots in the crew, and one pilot stayed back, and they have a contractor that's covering the airplane, and the other, so they train separately. Maybe it's the chief pilot or the DO who's typed on the Hawker who fills in when they only have two pilots on the airplane. So, there's so many reasons why each time you're in that airplane, you're interviewing.
Right.
And, it's like, it's cool because, especially in that case, like if you have check ride itis, well, that supporting crew member program, you get to sit through check ride after check ride after check ride. So like check ride itis doesn't even exist after that. I mean, I probably ran 100 check rides before I ran my ATP and PIC type check ride. So to me, it was just like another day in another like walking through the park. So but so I did that, and then honestly, I got my first job flying full time. I got a job with a charter company flying a G4. So
Oh,
out of
wow. That's super
CAE,
cool.
that was it. It was like, my first flying job was a G4 at a big charter company, and I flew my tail off. So that was like best case scenario. If you're young or you're unencumbered,
Hmm.
flying for a charter company is amazing because you're going to go everywhere and you're going to fly a lot. And so, you hear a lot of people say in the industry, oh, you don't want to fly charter, you don't want to fly 135. And that's true if you've already paid your dues and maybe you have kids and a wife or you have like something is keeping you home. That's true. But for a young pilot, charter companies are a phenomenal way to really
Yeah.
get experience. And so especially in the 135 world, you get to learn everything. You're doing all your flight planning, you're doing your fuel planning, you're doing like thinking about routes. If you're flying international, you're thinking about airspace you need to avoid.
Mm.
ForeFlight does a really good job now, but in the 135 world as a pilot, you get to develop so many skills that you don't necessarily get to develop when you go to a regional or a mainline. So yeah, it was just a phenomenal opportunity for me. I flew a lot, great airplane, and yeah, that was my
That's
transition from intern to full time
yeah.
flying.
Flying a G4. That's so
That's right.
cool. So you're flying literally all around the world.
That's it. Yeah, it was
I
amazing.
mean, that's so awesome. So for those that listen to this, I would highlight, in the you're thinking about, your journey into aviation, consider that, right? That is a great way to go. And so take that advice. I love that. I always wonder, for those that fly across the world, I mean, of course, airlines and all that, but charters, how did you get used to the language barriers and things like that? How did you go through that?
Well, Gabe, you're supposed to have a English proficiency to to be an ATP.
This
So,
is this is true.
ideally, globally, they have a really good handle on English, but that doesn't always work. Um, so it's pretty amazing. And really, the things like, it's not just their language barrier, but the way that they, in different countries, they handle you as ATC. Europe is very strict. Europe, like, the United States is mecca of aviation. There is no more access to the sky or
Yeah.
an airplane or fuel than you can get anywhere on earth than the United States. And that's the reason we train so many pilots here, honestly. But when you're flying, even in my world, like flying private jets and big business jets, like, you can go anywhere unencumbered in this country. And, when you think about it, geographically, it's not, I mean, you can fly from New York to LA, and if we were in Europe, you would go through like 12 different ATC agencies doing in that amount of space. Like, so the US has such a huge landmass that everybody's, US ATC. So,
Hmm.
in Europe, they're very controlled. But once you get down into Africa and you start crossing like, south of the equator, like, you get a lot of different stuff, especially Africa, South America. And so you really need, as a young pilot, you're taught by the older pilots, like, you need to ensure in the US, ATC is so good. You can really, you can believe, like, I know sometimes ATC is not correct, right? Like, it's always the pilot's authority. As the pilot, you have to maintain that PIC authority, even
Hmm.
in the US. But other places in the world is like, that you might be talking to someone, but there's a good chance they're not going to be telling you to do the right thing. Like, you need to be a PIC always when you're in Africa, especially because you might not
Trust
hear
but
them.
verify.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah. So you might not hear them. You might lose them. There's a lot of craziness going on. The Horn of Africa. There's a lot of, like, you stay away from certain airspace. So yeah, but the U.S. is really, again, ATC is the pinnacle. U.S. ATC is the pinnacle of ATC.
That's, I'm so glad you said that because I think that's sometimes, or maybe oftentimes, taken for granted here. If you don't have that
Yes.
perspective that you just offered, that can very well be taken for granted. And I have to tell you, I was just, I think it was just today, I was just talking to somebody about how controllers here. I have so many friends that are controllers, and they're fantastic. I mean, they're pilots most of the time, and I love flying with them because I learn so much. And I actually have a true passion for creating a relationship between pilots and ATC, right? Because we're a
Yes.
partner, and so that's really cool. I really appreciate you said that.
Absolutely.
So aviation has treated you very well from a professional standpoint, and so, and then you've taken that to different levels, right? You've. It seems like you have an entrepreneurial spirit. I would guess to say, is that a fair statement?
It is, absolutely. I knew that I would come full circle. I knew that tech and aviation and being on, like, riding the wave in something in aviation, I knew that was going to be my future. But sometimes you have to be a cog in the wheel, right? Like, sometimes you have to be, like, in order to really learn the things that I know now, I had to be a cog. And so I was flying the G4, and I was instructing at CAE part-time. I had an opportunity to teach full-time in the G550 program in Morristown, and so I took that. So I flew charter for like 2 years, and then I went back to CAE full-time. And, I've always had the entrepreneurial spirit, and I've bought and sold a couple companies over the last 10 years. But, the thing for me is that I knew aviation was going to be it. And so I really came full circle. And CAE is probably one of the largest tech companies in aviation. And so for
Sure.
me, as I grew in CAE, I kind of segmented myself back into that tech world. So I taught for 4 years of the 10 that I was there, but then I got more involved in on the business management side. So I worked as the liaison between CAE and Gulfstream and CAE and Textron. And so I would do things like work on training deliverables and efficacy of training and standardization of training across
Wow.
all of our locations. I did that for almost 3 years. And then I got into more of the tech stuff. And so CAE acquired Saber's operations platform, so I worked on that acquisition in the business jet segment. And then the last thing I was doing at CAE was I was analyzing simulator performance data, just so basically data points that are very similar to FDM, so flight data management. And
Hmm.
what we were doing is we were creating algorithms that looked at individual data points to say, okay, these 15 data points together are representative of a landing or an approach or a takeoff. And so what we were able to do is to really drill down on the data to create an objective model that would allow the instructors to be more subjective of their evaluations, right? Like how do the pilots work? And that's really where like training is going. So if you can allow a computer to objectively tell you as the instructor, like this is how they performed objectively, then the instructor can focus more on the subjective. How do they work together? How do they handle these emergencies? How do they handle this? And so really that's where CBTA, competency-based training and assessment, scenario-based trainings, like those types of things, like that's where the future of training is going, and
Hmm.
at the highest levels. But Part 61 primary training is so fragmented that for me, that's kind of the perfect segue into how I got to SIMUVATION. Is that I was able to learn, I was able to be a cog in the wheel at the highest
Hmm.
level of training in Part
Hmm.
142. So 142 is all professional simulator training, and so
Okay.
seeing that, um, it's like I was just really inspired to take what I know from that level of training and say, like, look, we don't have to wait until you're flying jets to learn in this manner. We can
Yeah.
do this from day one. And if we know it makes professional pilots better pilots, and it's easier for professional pilots to learn, like if the most experienced pilots these things are good for, then why aren't these things good for the most inexperienced pilots? Like that equation hasn't really panned out yet, but my efforts with SIMUVATION is that's why I think there's such an amazing opportunity.
No, that's well said. I mean, it's really well said, and I totally am tracking that. Why is it that the professional sides of things is always about the scenario? It seems to be scenario-based training, and what we do in GA is not.
Yeah.
Or there's a movement towards that, right? The
Yeah,
DMMS stuff and AQP stuff and all of
that's
that. I
right.
mean, that's a very big difference than just the normal training that we do. Is that a fair statement?
That's absolutely right. So I'll tell you, the reason I would say it's existed so far is because as a professional, if you're flying 135, you probably go to school every 6 months, right?
Yep.
If you're flying 91, you're only required every 12 months. Maybe you go every 8. It depends on the operation. But so let's just say a professional goes back to training every 6 to 12 months. Um, when you're always doing that, you're in this repetition where like you don't want to fly the check ride, right? Like, but that's
Right.
hard to not do if you're going to school every 6 months. You end up flying the check ride your whole career. So, airlines have been able to do this better earlier, where they have phase checks and they have other type
Hmm.
AQP, like you said. So airlines have really done this for a while. But with the Part 142 world, we're really getting into it more now. But I think the reason that it exists more in the 142 world is like, you have a couple things. Um, they're training more. So if you don't
Hmm.
get better at training, you just aren't getting better. You're just hitting the bar. And that's true in aviation. You know, PTS, the reason ACS is so much better than PTS is because you get to look at these things as a guide, right? You
Sure.
never want to train to the minimum standard. Like PTS, like you hit the standard, if you have this conversation with people, you never want to meet the standard because the
Yeah.
standard is
Right.
is just a standard, right?
Yeah.
If you're not performing consistently above the standard, there's a problem. And
Sure.
so that's where, scenario-based training, CBTA, that kind of thing, it really creates that next level. And so for me, the reason it hasn't happened in Part 61 is because of the fragmentation, right? And honestly, the best consumer is an educated consumer. And so professional pilots are educated on how to
Hmm.
make themselves better. It's not just about like, you're good at sniffing out what is good and what is not good. And
Hmm.
so unfortunately, a lot of primary training, you don't know better. You don't know until you know, right? So a lot of people in primary training, they're not saying like, hey, listen, this isn't good enough for me. Like they
Hmm.
get frustrated, and then the answer from their CFI is like, well, you didn't prepare, or you didn't do this, or you're not doing that. And then the learner is like, no, I, especially in aviation, people have a very specific personality in aviation, right? Like you're high
Hmm.
achievers, you're very type A, like you push yourself to excel. And you're like, I know I excel in every other phase in my life. I don't have I'm not comfortable accepting that this is me. Like there's got to
Hmm.
be a better way, right? But when you're in Part 61 training or primary training, it's just like, nope, you're not hitting the bar. And
Hmm.
so, unfortunately, I think a big piece of it is that the primary training space, nobody's really pushed. The consumer hasn't pushed, right? And the consumer is the person paying the flight instructors and paying the flight schools, and so that's challenging. It's a challenge.
It's definitely a challenge, and you see I see a lot of stories and hear a lot of stories lately where it's super disappointing, to be honest with you, as far as what some of these students are going through,
That's right.
because there's just got to be a different way to learn, and there's not just one size fits all. And so I did actually do my BFR just back in December. I actually did it with somebody that actually does scenario based training. So I did all of that through my BFR, which I thought was, to be quite honest with you, was like a completely different experience, and I loved it. It was fantastic.
Absolutely.
So that's really cool. So
Absolutely.
I would love to kind of get into the how you came up with your company and the vision and kind of the mission of where you're headed and what you're solving.
Yeah. So before we deviate too far from training, I'm gonna give you a couple things that are bold predictions, right?
Okay.
And so one of those bold predictions is that I believe in the next 10 years, every certificated pilot will be obligated to do sim training, right? So I think it will be much more reflective of what we see
Hmm.
in the professional pilot space.
Sure.
And the second bold prediction that I'll make is that over that same period, before you start flight training, you'll be obligated to pass a sim academy, where maybe it's 25 hours in a sim. And so both of those predictions is why I believe there's an opportunity for me. And that's kind of like the foundation of how I crafted this. And so, the thing is that there's so many pieces of aviation that are not best trained in an airplane, right? And there's so many things that you can really refine and work on in a sim that create that 80, 90-hour private pilot, right?
Hmm.
You need 40 hours to become a private pilot, but nobody gets their private in 40 hours. And so, the other piece that's kind of bold that I'll say is that, I may not make any friends by saying this, but when you really evaluate where the conflict in flight training is, who who doesn't benefit when it takes you 90 hours to get your private pilot certificate, right? Like as the pilot, you need 40 hours. And so again, if the consumer was better educated, maybe the consumer would say, well, flight school, how do you make it so that I only need to spend 40 hours in an airplane? Because this is a very expensive venture. And
Hmm.
so, the consumer doesn't say that.
Right.
And so, when you look at the conflict, it's like, well, we work in an industry where most of the flight instructors need flight time. So
Hmm.
if the in-flight instructor is delivering your training needs 1,500 hours, then it doesn't really, like, it's not much sweat off their back if it takes you 90 hours, because
Hmm.
now all of a sudden the highest value client is the one that you can keep going,
Sure.
and so Gabe, I don't want to say this like that's the foundation of flight training, right? But
Right.
if we don't address the conflicts, we're not doing anyone a service, right? So
Totally.
y- I think that, and then the flight schools, the flight schools model is to sell hours on airplanes, right? Like just break it down, the most
Yeah.
basic elements of the business. And
Right.
so, you have a business where you're selling hours on airplanes, and you have an instructor who's delivering training, probably not to make everyone the best pilots. They're doing it
Hmm.
because it's a path to the future, right? Like it's a
Right.
piece of the journey. And
Sure.
so I think until we kind of change that, which it probably will never change, there's not going to be enough instructors who are doing it to make better pilots. It's just not the way the industry works, right? So
Hmm.
that's where I think we start to implement new tools and new standards. And I don't necessarily think it'll take regulations that'll do it, but where I see it happening is through insurance, right? It's insurance makes the whole aviation world go round. So
Hmm.
I think it would be reasonable for an insurance company to say, before you put a human in an airplane, they should have a level of proficiency. And that level of proficiency can be gained in a simulator. And so hey, Mr. Flight School, before you put someone in an airplane for their first hour, maybe they need to have 5 hours in a sim. Maybe they need 10 hours in a sim.
Hmm.
And not only is it safer, but you create a better environment for the flight instructor, right? You have these very inexperienced aviators that are
Hmm.
teaching. And so now if we can make their day better and we can make it easier for them by creating this base of proficiency in the learner, like everybody wins, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
so I think that that's where the industry is going to go. And I think that's why I say things like I envision requiring a sim academy before you start flight training. Um, the piece with, BFRs are great. And you just said it. You're like, I took the best BFR. I love how it was done. Like,
Yeah.
but that's not typical, right? Like,
No, it's not.
if
Right.
that were typical, you wouldn't have anything to say. You wouldn't be like, Michael, this is the best BFR I've ever had. So,
Right.
you know, it's
Yeah.
so the way we train in simulators is just when you're using the right tool for the right job, it's just there's no way to beat it. Your iPhone's a hammer for like 30 seconds until you ruin your $1,500 computer, but you were able to use it as a hammer for a few
Yeah.
seconds, right?
Hmm.
So it's not the best hammer. And the same thing with the sim. A sim is not the best tool for everything. But, and it's so funny because everybody will say, well, you can't learn to land in a sim. And I'm like, well, that's really funny because have you ever experienced someone's landing problem to be landing, right? Is it speed control? Is it
Right.
throttle control? Is it
Sure.
pitch control? Are they pitching for speed when they should be using throttle for speed? Are they pitching for altitude when they should be using throttle for altitude, right? And like
Hmm.
those are individual. When you look at CBTA, that's really where it goes. It's like you
Yeah.
learn to manipulate the throttle. You learn to manipulate the aircraft so that you can pitch for speed or power for speed. Or it's like, so if you can build that base of proficiency, do you really think all of these primary students would have a problem landing? Right?
Right. Right.
So,
For
so
sure.
like that's where I think we go with training and simulator training, and that's my thought.
I think that's, I mean, I really, that resonates with me, and I think you're spot on. I mean, it's funny. I have a very good friend. His name is James, and he is a he's a captain for Southwest. And so I went down, and he's a check airman and all that good stuff. I went down to Dallas and was able to get into those simulators down there, which I believe are owned and operated by CAE, if I
There you go.
recall.
Yep.
And I have to tell you, the realistic nature of that thing was ridiculous. And I could not believe it. Like we spent probably 3 hours in it, and we did landings, we did all kinds of IMC stuff. Like it was
Yes.
incredible. And when I walked out, I'm like, why is it that we don't do any of this type of stuff in GA? I mean, maybe in the Redbird here and there, but like there's no requirement to do it. And I'm like, this is really strange. But anyways, that was something that I did literally about 6 months ago, and it was fantastic. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
That's it. And the devices, right? So there's all kinds of qualification levels for sims, and
yeah.
that's a world that I've become very familiar with. But if you just break it down very simply, so those level D sims, you can count landings, right? So you can use
Yeah.
everything. Now the sims that you'll see in primary training are probably AATDs,
Right.
even if they're full motion. And
Hmm.
and what's happened is that the AATDs have gotten so good that you could probably produce a device very close to a level D device with the quality of equipment that's out there now. When you
Really?
look at companies like Real Sim Gear, when you look
Yeah.
at some of the stuff that Redbird's doing with devices in motion, like if you start to look at all this stuff and then visuals, right? And even cost. So, like, in the last 5 to 10 years, the quality, the realism, and
Hmm.
the like the variables you have to work within, right? The constraints, like the weight
Hmm.
and the size.
Right.
All of those things have come together so well that we're really close to being able to deliver a device that's as good as a level D sim that you can count landings on it in the primary training space. Now, they don't do them because of certification requirements, but that doesn't mean it can't happen, and especially
Right.
over the next 5 years. So,
Sure.
to your point, that's exactly like, for me, the reason that I became obsessed with solving this problem with using simulators in primary training is because of those things exactly. And so for me, I looked at it and said, why don't we use more sims in primary training? One of them is that the devices are expensive. One is that they're not accessible. Another is that the flight instructors in primary training, they get no credit for training in a sim.
Mm.
So you want to talk about a conflict? Well, you have an instructor, their whole
Right.
motivation is to deliver flight training. They're getting paid probably most likely very subpar wages. And
Sure.
so, how do we lean on those flight instructors to say, look, you're going to give 20 hours of instruction to every one of these students and you're going to make $15 an hour and you're not going to get the only motivation that you're there for, which is a flight hour. So
Hmm.
I started to look at each one of those variables and solve for the variables, and that's how I crafted this mobile training unit. And so we built this fully self-contained unit that has a generator that'll run the entire unit for 30 hours. It has satellite internet that allows you to connect to different scenarios, but also allows an instructor to connect to the device remotely. You have a briefing room built into the front of the trailer. You have the sim
Nice.
bay in the back of the trailer. It's heated, it's air conditioned. So when you look at all these variables, right? Like, why aren't there more sims in flight schools? Well, because they don't have the space. They don't have the money to commit
Right.
100 or 150 grand to a device. And then the instructors will say, "Oh, this device is really it's forget this device. Let's go in the airplane," right? And
Mhm.
that's the typical CFI response.
Right.
And so when I started looking at this, the piece that really is the pinnacle of the solution are the remote instructors. So
Sure.
all of our remote instructors are professional pilots, and it's not that professional pilots are the best flight instructors. That's not what I'm saying. But professional pilots have the perspective of what good simulator training is. And
Yeah.
so it's like, don't look at it and say, well, you can't land in the sim. Look at it and say, you know what? We can perfect pitch for airspeed, power for airspeed, pitch for altitude, power for altitude. We can perfect that before you
Hmm.
even stumble on it in an airplane. And so the professional pilot has that perspective. And so until we get to a point where the instructors can deliver intentional simulator instruction, we sims will never take hold. But with the SIMUVATION solution, it's fully self-contained, it's mobile, so it doesn't have to sit in a flight school, it doesn't have to sit in one place, and then the
Hmm.
instructors are all remote, and they're all CFIs that have the perspective of what good sim training is. And now, as we train more pilots in simulators in the primary training space, well, now all of a sudden the instructors will have that perspective. As CFIs grow, they'll know what good sim instruction is and how to use it when it's a hammer and when it's not a hammer, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so that's really where I think how the industry grows and matures.
Man, you are definitely a forward thinker, brother. I love it. It's really cool. I'm digging it. So you had some exciting times at Sun and Fun. So you literally launched at Sun and Fun. Can you tell us about that and how that went and how things are going now?
Yeah, so I sent the sim. I bought a Redbird MX2, and and when you go to the site, you'll see it's the smallest full motion device that I could get, and it fits in the trailer perfectly. And so I actually bought this sim from off eBay. It's a longer story than this podcast has time for, but so I bought it off eBay, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna send it back to Austin to Redbird, and I'm gonna have them rehab it. So they did. I gave them metal, and they completely built everything. So new CPU, new monitors, like everything. It's a brand new
Wow.
sim now. And so while it was sitting at Redbird, the COO of Redbird, Charlie, calls me. He's like, Michael, I have this opportunity, and would you be interested? And it was the opportunity to brand it as an RAF, so that's the Recreational Aviation Foundation. It was to brand it as their sim. And then that gave us the opportunity to take it to a couple different places. So Charlie said, I was really on their sales guy because I'm like, I want this sim back. I need this sim back. We need to get it moving. And so when he called me, he's like, I know there's probably no chance you're gonna love this, but here's the opportunity. I'm like, Charlie, I freaking love this. In 5 years from now, we're gonna be having a beer, and you're gonna be like, how did I pitch this guy this idea? Because like that's the kind of crazy stuff I love. And
Yeah,
so
for
I'm like,
sure.
yes. And so we branded the sim RAF, and then we launched it at Sun and Fun, and it was there under a gazebo, and it was like very RAF green and orange, and so that was where we had it first. But it wasn't even in the sim. It wasn't even in the trailer yet. So I brought it to Austin in the trailer, and then we rehabbed it, and it was the first time it was ready for me to put in the trailer was the end of Sun and Fun. So we had it there, great response, great reception from RAF and everybody that came by. And then at the end of the event, we load it into the trailer. And there's a reel of that on my social, on the
Sure.
SIMUVATION Instagram page. And it's like just squeezes in. It's pretty wild. It's hilarious. And so Charlie looks at me. I pull up with the rig, and Charlie's like, Michael, this is not what I had in mind. This thing is huge. It's 45 feet long. It's 13 feet tall. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And so we put it in the sim then, and then from that point on, we took it out to Bozeman for the RAF's biannual meeting. They have a every other year, and so we did that, and then I took it to a couple other places, showed a couple other people, and then we had we brought it in the rig back to Oshkosh. But we ran out of space. Like there wasn't space in the booth, so we had to take it out of the trailer again. But at least when we were at Oshkosh, I had a video of it working. Like and in Bozeman, we got to bring people from the RAF through it, and
Nice.
everybody was like, Michael, this is just so simple. And I'm like, that is the pinnacle of something for an entrepreneur. Like you want somebody to be like, I get it. It is
Yeah.
simple. You don't want to sell a really abstract idea. I've tried it. Don't take it from me. I've tried it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so when people are like, "This is so simple," they look at you like they're insulting you. But like as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, you're like, "Oh my god, thank you."
Sure.
Um,
Exactly. Yeah.
so yeah, the last 3 months have been really crazy, and we connected, and I thought we were gonna get to see you at Oshkosh. It didn't happen. You were like
Yep.
shorts and flip flops on the beach. Um, and you missed
Yeah.
you missed probably the best weather Oshkosh has ever seen too. It was
Yeah, I know.
phenomenal.
I saw that, man. And not to mention down in St. Martin, it was like the hottest weather down there. Um, but
Man.
it was a very hard decision for me to do that. But I just wanted a little bit of a disconnect and downtime.
I
But
hear
I
you.
mean, you know what though? You're right. As far as the somebody to say, look, this is simple. That's exactly what you're looking for, and I totally agree. By the way, I teach that a lot in what I do. I always teach that it's simple, but sometimes it's not as easy as you think, right? Simplicity
That's
doesn't
right.
mean easy, and
No.
so, but it does need to be simple. So, tell us about. I'm out there. I'm doing my training. I'm looking for this type of solution. How do I work with you? Like if I were looking to do this, walk us through that process?
Amazing. So we're actually rolling out some new improvements to the site where you'll effectively be able to book the sim just like you would book an airline ticket. So there would be one person who says, Simuvation, please bring the sim to Leesburg, Virginia, right? And so that person is the one responsible for booking the sim. Then when the sim is in Leesburg, there are multiple people that can basically schedule time. So the sim is in one location for a period of time for a minimum of 12 days and 72 flight hours. And while it's there, maybe you have a flight school, maybe you're a flight instructor with a few students or instrument students that could benefit from using it. And maybe just some random people in the Virginia area are interested in getting into the sim. So those are basically three people that once the sim is in a location, they can reserve time on the sim. The person that reserves it, right? The person that says bring it to Leesburg, that's the person who can control who can book time on the device. I think my ideal target is probably a flight school that trains 50 or 60 students a year. I think that's a flight school that's small enough where maybe they're training 5 or 6 students a month. It's probably small enough where they don't have a $100,000 or $150,000 device. Maybe they don't have a ton of extra space. And maybe they can benefit from having an additional instructor, right? Remote instruction.
Sure.
So I think that's really the target. But I've had a lot of people reach out to me to say, hey, Michael, can you send the sim to me? I want to do an intensive instrument training or something along those lines. I actually sent it to a guy in South Jersey a couple weeks ago, and he needed a time build for his commercial check ride. So I was able to work with him and get him some total time in the device, because you can use 50 hours of total time in these AATDs towards your commercial check ride. So I think there's in this, to answer your question, you can book it on simuvation.com
Sure.
as of next week. And so
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
that's the real simple way to do it.
I've been scouring your guys' website, by the way, just, over the last few days, and I'm like, this is so cool. For those that don't understand what AATD is, can you just touch on that?
Sorry.
It's
Yeah,
good.
it's so so there are different levels of simulation devices, right? A BATD is the lowest level of that, and the AATD is the Advanced Aviation Training Device. So it's the higher level that you can credit more flight time towards each of your check rides.
There you go. Perfect. Thank you. I wanted to just make sure that anybody that's listening understands what that means for those that tune in. So I have to tell you, we need to talk again, because I have some ideas as far as what you might consider or what maybe some opportunities that we might be able to consider together as far
Amazing.
as I could, to be honest with you, maybe, just maybe, there's a point in time where we could bring that thing down here and we could have a whole bunch of smokehouse people come in there and get some training. And I think
Gabe,
that
we'll
would
get
be
it down
super
there.
cool.
We'll get it down there next week. I love it. You're not far from me. I love
Yeah.
to create fires. This is cool.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a really cool buzz, and I think it would be awesome. I just love the innovation and the innovative thinking. I think that's really cool, and I really appreciate that. And it's frankly something we need, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. I just bought I was down in I think I was in St. Martin, and my buddy texted me. He says, "Hey, I'm selling my simulator. Do you want to buy it?" I'm like, "Sure, sounds great." And so I actually now have an AATD simulator, and I can actually log time with it and stuff like that. And so, I still need to take receipt of it, but it's going to go in a room in my house, and it's going to be a sim room. So you'd appreciate that.
That's amazing, dude. I love it. I love it.
So that's awesome. Can you real quick before we kind of go into the conclusion, can you tell us about your team and who helps you with this venture?
Yeah. So, Redbird has really been essential in the device piece of it, right? And so for me, partnering with someone who builds a really good device as it is, that was essential so that I don't have to build sims, right? Like there's some other good people. And we have some other exciting stuff in the works for hardware. So basically the hardware engineering and everything, certification, all that stuff, I'm leveraging the people that are in this space and that have been doing it already. And the cool thing is that they're really evolving rapidly right now to create better products. So for me, that's a huge piece of this.
Yeah.
And then as far as like courseware, syllabus, I have some really talented people working behind the scenes that that have been helping with this. And I don't want to be super vague, but
Sure.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't want to like blow up anybody for any conflicts either. So
Yeah. No. It's all good. It's all good.
yeah. So
I just knew that you've got to have a good team around you and resources around you to bring this together, because you're really what you're doing is bringing solutions together, right? You're not actually creating a new solution, really. It's that you're bringing different solutions together for something new. That's what it seems
exactly right. That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. And being a cog in the wheel, as much as it's not who I am, it really creates a phenomenal network. So I've been able to leverage a lot of these relationships that I've built over the last 10 years and people that have the right perspective that I've been able to tap into and say, hey, look, this is what I'm working on. They're like, Michael, you're freaking crazy, but I love it. Yeah, I want to help you with this.
Yeah. I just got back from I'm not take it for what it is. I just got back from a Tony Robbins event last week, and you want to talk about crazy ideas and things that I heard from other people, and I love that stuff. I love the entrepreneurial spirit, so I think it's really cool. And if there's any ways that we can collaborate and I can help, with whatever it is, I definitely want to do that because I think it's awesome.
I love that, Gabe. I appreciate it.
Of course, brother. That being said, are you still flying? I mean, are you still doing charters and things? I mean, as well?
I am. So I've
Okay.
flown for a management company down in Puerto Rico for the last 8 years, and so I fly. There's 7 families, 7 airplanes of his fleet that I can fly. So all GV type, the
Nice.
450, 550. So I fly. I'd say 5 days a month consistently, maybe 10 if it's really busy. But it's tough to be away 10 days. So
Yeah.
I'd say I fly 5 days a month still.
Okay. That's very
Yeah.
cool. So you're staying in the air. Do you fly any
Yeah.
small GA stuff?
So
Do
I
you have
own a 1946 Fairchild 24, so like a big Howard Hughes
Nice.
tailwheel.
That's
I've
great.
had a couple of them. I had a twin Comanche that I built up. It was really a sweet airplane, but I didn't really have a mission. I wasn't going anywhere, so I sold that last year. But yeah, I mean, if it has wings, I'll fly it. I have a lot of friends
Yeah.
with airplanes. Like I just love that. So yes, I stay very, very ingrained in the like
Well,
GA
I'll
world.
have to. That's awesome. I'll have to fly up and we'll have to grab lunch or something together soon. And
Absolutely
once I get my airplane back on Friday, hopefully Friday.
amazing.
I'm in a partnership with a Piper Cub, J3 Cub. So
Huh?
I haven't spent a lot of time in it, but I need to do that. It's actually at another airport, so it's not as convenient to just go over there and fly it. So it kind of resembles what you got a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not too
Absolutely.
far, but
No.
that's awesome.
That's
Well, this is
amazing. Yeah, it'll
great.
make you a good pilot, Gabe.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
that
Stick
J3,
and rudder,
yeah.
brother, right?
That's it.
That's good. Well, I really appreciate this. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to touch on that maybe I didn't ask or we didn't touch on at all?
No,
Anything else that's
I think this was amazing. We could probably talk for another hour on a
Oh,
few
for
other
sure.
topics. So, yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm psyched.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show and for what you're doing for aviation in its entirety. I think that it's really needed, and I can't wait for us to listen to this 10 years from now and see where you're at and how much impact you've created. What
That's
does the
amazing.
last question I'll ask of you? What has aviation given to you, or what have you given to aviation? What does aviation mean to you?
Yeah, I think that when you think about, going anywhere and everybody's like, "Oh, what do you do?" Right?
Hmm.
Like I've done other things, like even in finance, like, oh, I'm in finance or I'm in money. It's like, what does that even mean, right? But when you look at somebody and say, like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I fly Gulfstreams. It's just like, and then when you talk to people, it's like, oh yeah, I'm working. Well, where are you? Oh, I'm in the south of France. Like they're like, that's not work. So like aviation has given a guy like me the ability to not have to work. Like I'm just like, I've never been that great studier. I've never loved being cooped up in an office. So for me, like it's given me my whole life. Like it's the place where a guy like me who doesn't love to be bound to within 4 white walls can have a
Hmm.
really good career and really make great money too, Gabe. Honestly, like I think that's one of the things I push so many young people into starting to fly, because I'm like,
Hmm.
look, this is an opportunity for a career that we've never seen. Like it's just such an amazing way to make a living. And so honestly, to me, that I know it's all professionally focused, but I could talk to you a ton of time about personal aviation, but really aviation has given me that professional life that I'm proud of and I really
Yeah.
love.
And you should be proud of it. I mean, it's an amazing story and it's an amazing journey that you've created and continue to do so. So that's really cool. And even this, right? Just being able to, here's one of the things I love about aviation is the community is so good. And
That's it.
it's just the people you meet. We all have that common passion. And so that connects you. And I think that's really important. So
For sure.
I just want to commend you on a job well done. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on this show. And I've really appreciated this conversation and really do look forward to the collaboration that we can do in the future.
Likewise,
Well done.
Gabe. Thank you so much for the platform.
Thank you so much.
You.
And thank you so much for those tuning in to Hanger Flying, and I hope you can join us on the next episode. Just as a reminder, we do drop every episode every Monday around 8:30, so that is the name of the game. So those out there listening, thanks for tuning in. Safe flying, and we'll talk to you soon.